because they're the only ones. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share with you guys this morning. These opportunities, usually I get this one, the Thanksgiving weekend, so I'm glad that you're here. But I've tried to explain that the longer I go between having these chances, then the longer I go when I get these chances, then I have more to say. It's built up. Yeah, would you? Well, especially ever since I got essentially replaced doing the announcements by Ruth, who just gives accurate information in a concise manner. Whatever. Something that's easy to remember. Like that's what you're looking for in an announcements person. All right, so some of you may know that I like comic books quite a bit. Growing up, I liked comics and superheroes, but didn't always read them regularly. It was just kind of whenever I had a chance to, at the 7-Eleven, and yes, you can get that issue of Moon Knight, because it was not that, but I didn't really start reading comics real regularly until I was about 19. But then since then, you see, I totally had hair. It's not photoshopped either. That was real. See, Michael? All right.
I am impressed.
You should be. And you should also be a little bit afraid. Because, maybe. Yeah, it is really pretty rough. My dad has more hair than I do. That's a little bit traumatic. Mom's side? Yeah, you're in trouble there too. If it's mom's side. You just got, sorry son, enjoy it while you can. Since I've read thousands of comic books, and one of the things that some of them have been very good, some of them, one of the things that I really like about comics is the inner monologue that you get, that you don't get in a lot of other mediums, where you see what insight into their head, their thought process, what they're feeling, the way that they make their decisions. I like that a lot. That's kind of a fun part of comics for me. It's one of the things that sometimes prevents comics from translating very well to the movie screen. Thank you, Green Lantern. But we don't get a lot of that in the Bible. We don't get a lot of inner monologue in the Bible. We don't get what people are thinking. The Bible, of course, isn't just stories. It's a collection of a number of different types of writing. Poetry, letters, prophecy, and, narratives or stories are a part of it. And just like you don't read the op-ed page of the newspaper the same way you read the front page, your approach to reading the different parts of the Bible needs to adjust depending on what you're reading. And for the younger people in the crowd, there used to be these things called newspapers. Anyway, today we're going to look at a story in 1 Samuel, and then also at a psalm that David writes during that time of his life. And it's the closest thing I think we get in the Bible to an inner monologue. We see what David's going through, and then we see how he responds to it. The Bible is full of stories about people who are flawed and imperfect, and God still uses them to do great things. And those stories have always been a great encouragement to me, because I am acutely aware of how flawed I am. You go all the way from Adam and Eve to John writing his letters and Revelation. People that are far from perfect, God uses to do things that matter for eternity. And as we're going to see today, getting into David's head, to me, brings even more of a humanness to him, and it makes him even more relatable to me. And we see how he deals with a problem, but we also see his response to that situation as something that we can be striving for. So this morning there's going to be a fair amount of kind of scene setting, a couple of tangents that are on purpose. But then once we get where we're going, it won't take very long to put it all together. I don't want to say I promise, but something like that. Something like promise. So let's kind of recap. We're only going to deal with David's story today. We're only worried about from before he became the king. We're going to kind of recap what's going on up to that point. I just don't. Really, they couldn't afford some pajamas for the guy. I just don't. Really, come on. So Israel never had a king. You see this in 1 Samuel 9. Israel never had a king, but they demanded one, and Saul was chosen to be the king. In 1 Samuel 11, we see him formally installed, coronated as the king. In chapter 15, I don't know what's going on. I'll just try to ignore it. Justin, can you turn off your ringtone? I think that's I'm just kidding. By chapter 15, so he becomes the king at 11. By chapter 15, God is, direct quote, sorry that he had made Saul king over Israel. And I would really love to dig into that one, but that's going to have to wait for another week, because why would God do something that he was later sorry about doing? But that's not the only time we see it. For instance, the flood. Anyway, that's 15. Chapter 16, David is anointed king. No wasting time. God's got his replacement lined up. Chapter 17 is David versus Goliath. And there's no indication in the David versus Goliath story that Saul knows that David has already been tagged as his replacement. He's asking whose son is that? But we also don't know for sure that he doesn't know. All right? That's 17. A lot of stuff happens in 1 Samuel 18. First, David becomes just best pals with Jonathan, Saul's son, which is a little weird. I didn't even realize this until I was studying and preparing for this morning. That Jonathan was as many as 27 years older than David. But we think about them as being just these super tight. It's a great example of biblical friendship. But there was a pretty big age gap, which, I don't know, it's different, but I kind of like it. Saul starts to send David out with the army. He does real well. He puts him over the army. David does very well. But then David's popularity begins to rise, and Saul doesn't like that very much. People are singing David's praises instead of his. So also in 18, we see the first time Saul tries to kill him. And then David marries Saul's daughter, and I'm going to try to get this right every time. Michal. Sort of that challah bread kind of sound in the middle there. I don't want to, for a long time in my head, I just called her Michael, but I don't want my son to feel weird about that. So, Michal. It's not her name? It's Michal. I actually looked it up. And the internet is always right. It's a little bit weird because David had earned Saul's oldest daughter, or oldest unmarried daughter at least, by killing Goliath, but then he ends up marrying the youngest daughter. We're going to find out in just a little bit that she is super cool. And then Saul spends years trying to kill David, but then with occasional periods of him bringing him back into the fold to be part of the house band in the palace or to do some military stuff. So that brings us to the story we're going to look at this morning in 1 Samuel 19. It is still weird for me to do this without pacing, by the way. When I used to do this, I would, just for my own, so I didn't get bored, I would do a lot of wandering around. So I just, if I'm a little wiggly, that's just...
Would you like Justin to come up?
Just push me back and forth? That would be excellent. Thank you. It's got to be right at the pace that I'm thinking, though. Mom? It is weird to have your mom push you in a wheelchair. Think, hey, this has already happened before. But, I was a little small.
You probably have more hair, too.
Probably. But less sideburns, I would imagine. Yeah, that's true. Really? I'm sure you look the same. You guys doing okay? Because you're on the other side this morning, and I know it's kind of messing you up. Wow, that's admirable. To just not just turn around and walk right back out. So, 1 Samuel 19 starts with Jonathan convincing Saul to agree to not kill David. This doesn't last very long, but Saul agrees that he's not going to kill David. And they bring David in. But then there's another war, and David goes out and beats up the Philistines again. And we're going to pick up the story from there in 1 Samuel 19, chapter 19, verse 9. Then an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand while David was playing music. Now I'm was very tempted to just skip this verse because it's tricky. But Adam has established an admirable and important precedent of not skipping over the hard parts, which is really an awesome trait in a pastor. I'll just be honest. Usually pastors won't tell you that they're skipping the hard parts, but sometimes you'll go back and read and go, oh, hey, wait, you didn't mention this. Yeah, there's a reason, because it's hard. Sometimes the Bible gets confusing, so I was tempted to skip it. It's troubling, because the idea of anything evil coming from the Lord just doesn't make sense in the context of the whole Bible. Last week I know Adam mentioned how context always determines the meaning, which is very true, but sometimes it's the context of that paragraph or that book. Certainly historical context matters, but then even the context of the whole Bible, kind of look at things in those kinds of lenses. And so this one is just hard to get jived. So I looked at it in a bunch of English translations, and it still really wasn't clicking for me. So I took a look at the original Hebrew, and it turns out I never took Hebrew, and so that really wasn't much help either, it turned out. I tried. Sorry, bro, I tried. Adam's not going to watch this. So I can just say whatever. But don't tell him when I say anything bad about him. One time in college, Adam was in a play called Improvisations on a Theme from Samuel. It was excellent. And if he can find the script, he might make us do it sometime. He played several characters in the play, but his very favorite, and I'll say his best role in terms of performance, was Man with Sword. He was awesome as Man with Sword. That role was later played by Kristen Stewart when they did the play again. So, pretty important. I don't know why I just told you that. What we do know, even though the Hebrew wasn't helpful, is that a few chapters earlier, God has withdrawn his blessing and anointing on Saul. And because of his just continued disobedience and disregard for God's instructions. I did a lot of reading about this. I spent a fair amount of time on the phone with Adam dialoguing through this. And really it seems like the explanation is just that simple, that in the absence of God's Spirit, something evil came in and filled that void. And from the Lord, in a sense, this was Adam's perspective, I'll blame him. Doesn't everything originate from the Lord? Okay. Well, that made enough sense to me that I didn't skip it. That God was no longer with Saul, and in that void came something evil. And that is, as far as we can tell, the root of the rest of Saul's days, which are miserable. He spends years chasing and trying to kill David, and I imagine he would, and I don't say this with any levity at all, he may have had mental health issues, and we see him just acting so erratically. But there's definitely a spiritual component to it. Anyway, in verse 10, the next verse, Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul so that he struck the spear into the wall. David fled and escaped that night. Saul chucks a spear at David. This is artwork by my fine young son, Michael, guitarist. He's available for commissions after the service. Throws a spear at David. David, as spider sense go off, does some sweet ninja move to get out of the way of the spear. It sticks into the wall. He throws it so hard. And then David bolts out of there. And it's after that this story gets super awesome. Verses 11 and 12. Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep watch over him, planning to kill him in the morning. David's wife Michal told him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So she let David down through the window. He fled away and escaped. Now, this is Saul's daughter, but she's also David's wife. And she can recognize her dad's crazy eyes. And she tells David that you got to get out of town tonight because he's going to be dead tomorrow. So he takes off out the window. Out the window, takes off. And I assume he had to go out the window because Saul had guys, across the street from the house in some donkey cart with curtains over, one-way glass, sitting over there with night vision goggles and bad coffee. It says Jerusalem Exterminators on the side of the cart or something. They're just checking it out, waiting to report in. She's coming back. She has Pepto. Repeat, Pepto. I don't know exactly how they were reporting in. It might have been carrier owl or just a dude that had to run a lot, the intern. And so here's the thing. This is one of the tangents. Sometimes the window is our only opportunity, only option. Sometimes we wait and wait for God's wide open door for something, and He's provided a perfectly good window right here for our use. That sometimes the opportunities that we have aren't normal, which I love. I love that God can be unpredictable. I love that sometimes He asks us to do things that look weird to other people. It's scary when that happens. I used to really enjoy having everyone just think I was a weird dude. But that's tempered a little, I guess, as I'm old. But still, there's an excitement, and it's an experience that really isn't like anything else that I've ever had in life. When you do something that steps out and feels a little weird and know that that's what God has asked you to do, that's an incredible experience. And sometimes we need to be acutely aware that there's a window, and that not only is it there, but that's what we're supposed to use. That's the opportunity, is the thing over here that looks weird. I love that. All right, so Michal goes to work covering David's tracks. Verses 13 and 14. Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed. She put a net of goat's hair on its head and covered it with the clothes. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." This is one of my favorite details in the whole Bible. Every kid that's ever put pillows under their blanket and prop something up as a debt of gratitude to Michal. She's putting a statue in the bed. She's putting a wig on it. She's pulling the covers up. And then she's telling Saul's goon squad that David is sick. And I get the impression that, David should have just stopped with the one wife because she's really cool. You just, why? That was just a bad move, I just think. He had something good there. He didn't need to act. But that's a tangent. But I just picture this very Ferris Bueller kind of scene. Sorry guys, David is sick. Can't you just hear him? She just tell him, the goon squad, tell Daddy to come back tomorrow because he's sick. Verses 15 through 17. Then Saul sent the messengers to see David for themselves. Apparently, they go back and say, "We couldn't get him because he was sick. He had the sniffles, and we didn't want to bother him because he was eating the soup, and it was just that kind of a thing." So, yeah, just so awesome. What a story. He said, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him." Carry the whole bed if you have to. Just pick the thing up and bring him here. When the messengers came in, the idol was in the bed with the covering of goat's hair on its head. Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me like this, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped?" Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" So the ruse doesn't hold up real well on close inspection. Oh, hey, that's not him in the bed. And then she tells Saul that David had threatened to kill her so that Saul doesn't kill her. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. He just got away. So for the next several chapters, I just love that story. The next several chapters, we see David on the run from Saul. And these chapters cover several years of this happening. Sometimes we see Jonathan passing information to David. And sometimes we see David and the soldiers that were with him helping people, doing these missions, sort of like the Hebrew A-team. Just if you can find them, and, if they can help, maybe you can hire the A-team, kind of a situation. And it's going on. We're going to pause just for a quick moment in chapter 24 of 1 Samuel, verses 2 through 4. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to look for David and his men in the direction of the rocks of the wild goats, which just sounds like a place I want to go. He came to the sheepfolds beside the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. I'm not adding that, that's in the Bible. And now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, 'I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you.'" Then David went and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. So Saul goes into the cave just to treat it like his own personal whiz palace. And it turns out that David and his army are in that same cave hiding. But instead of killing Saul, his soldiers are like, "This is your chance, go get him." And instead of killing Saul, he just cuts off a little corner of his robe so that later he shows Saul, "I could have killed you." But he even feels bad about that. David is trying to act honorably. He's just on the run. He doesn't want to get killed. It's okay to not want to get killed. It's okay. David isn't denying anything. He's not renouncing the anointing God has placed on him. He's just trying to stay alive so he can do what God's called him to do. He even feels bad about cutting part of his coat because he felt like he had raised his hand against the king that God had set in place. This story continues over many years and for the rest of 1 Samuel. But in the middle of all of this, David writes some songs. And that's where we're able to get into his head. Most of the time, I'm glad that I don't have any kind of telepathy because I probably don't want to know what you are thinking. And I'm really sure that you don't want to know what I am thinking.
Man, that Chris Byers sure is a manly guy. Do we have any pie left from Thanksgiving, or did I eat it all for breakfast?
When we look at Psalm 35, we see how David is responding to years of strife that weren't the result of anything that he did wrong. Sometimes, this is a flawed view, sometimes it's harder for me to feel compassion for someone whose life is a mess because they were an idiot. I should still feel compassion. God still loves them. God wants to rescue them. But sometimes it's hard to drum up that kind of compassion when it's just a series of dumb choices that led to someone being in crisis. In this case, none of this is David's doing. He never asked to be anointed king. He never asked to be brought into the palace before it was his time. He never asked to be set in charge of the armies, as far as we know. He just did the tasks that were before him. And 8 years maybe, of his life, he's at least off and on the run from Saul. All of this has been to set the scene for what he writes in Psalm 35. And he wrote this, keep in mind the escaping out the window story, and then more of that And then right around the time of the story we read in 1 Samuel 24, in the cave, having that opportunity to kill him, passing on it. Right around then is when he wrote Psalm 35. I just love it because we get to see what he was thinking and feeling in the middle of that crisis. The whole chapter, Psalm 35, the whole chapter is worth reading. I encourage you to read it, but just so we can be done before the kids show up for school in the morning. We're just going to read the end section. It's broken into, it's beautiful, it's poetry. If we had the tunes that went with the Psalms, I would sing it for you, so you can be glad that those did not survive to this day. But we have the words. Psalm 35 is really broken into 3 sections, and each section kind of has this same 3-part process. Expressing the gravity of David's situation, the problems that he's facing. Then he cries out to God and asks for God to intervene. And then he gives thanks to God and worships God because God is good and worthy of worship. And pledging to give God all the praise when God resolves the situation. So that is repeated 3 times. We're just going to look at that 3rd time, the end of Psalm 35. Start at verse 17. How long, O Lord, will you look on? Rescue me from their ravages, my life from the lions. Then I will thank you in the great congregation. In the mighty throng I will praise you. Do not let my treacherous enemies rejoice over me, or those who hate me without cause wink the eye. All right, I don't really know what that is. Was that traumatic for you? Okay. Maybe that's it. For they do not speak peace, but they conceive deceitful words against those who are quiet in the land. They say, they open wide their mouths against me. They say, aha, aha, our eyes have seen it. His circumstances are miserable, and he doesn't shy away from describing them as such. These kind of statements from David are so encouraging to me, because when your struggles are horrific, it's okay to say that they're horrific. There's nothing Christian about pretending that your horrible circumstances aren't really so bad. God isn't intimidated by us seeing our surroundings for what they are. Lots of people in the Bible went through misery. Everyone in this room has gone through or is going through a challenging crisis, a miserable, unconscionable, wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy kind of experience. Faith doesn't require us to pretend that things are better than they are. God doesn't ask us to be people who refuse to acknowledge reality. Here is David, a man after God's heart, going into great detail about the hard times that he's enduring. One of the things that we think that we do well here in our church is to try to not make anyone feel like they have to be perfect. And I think we do a decent job of cultivating that kind of a culture. But I want to say it very clearly. If your situation sucks, it's okay to say that it sucks. Now, obviously, I have some health issues, and I don't want to take the time to get into all the details about everything at the moment, but many of you have been here and walked through stuff with me over the last 5 years plus, and obviously some of you much longer than that. I don't know if you recall, when we moved here, a little over 5 years ago, we moved to Riverbank to be part of this church. And I had a cane, and I almost never used it. And when I did, it was only in the house when I was having just a really bad day. I was in some decline. I've had health, it's been my whole life. But sort of around the time that we came here, and this is not something I'm blaming on Riverbank necessarily. We just went in, I'd been, and then just kind of a much steeper drop. And then I went to, and we're starting to use the cane. The first time I used it out of the house, and then, like the first time I showed up at church with it, felt really weird. Then I bought that sweet hurricane that stands up on its own. Yeah, that's a good one. And then it folds up like some kind of sweet ninja weapon. Snaps out. Yeah, I like that one. And then things were getting worse. Then I got the wheelchair, and then I didn't use the wheelchair, and I was still trying to mentally, but I wasn't leaving my house. And so it became like, well, if I want to do anything, if I don't want to be, at the time, 40-year-old shut in, I guess I'm going to use the wheelchair. I remember the first Sunday that I had it, I just left it in the car. I just used the cane and came home, and probably had to leave halfway through the service because my back was so messed up. A lot of you know I had surgery just over a year ago. Like last Thanksgiving, I barely could make it to dinner, which was in my living room, from my kitchen. That was the longest I'd been out of bed in a month at that point. I had surgery last year, and at this point, I'm a little worse than I was before I had it. And it looked like things were going good, and then back down. But I was already sliding, and I figure I ended up about the same place I would have either way. I've had physical, health issues my whole life, and sometimes it's hard. I have the best attitude that I possibly can. I try to have a healthy perspective, but sometimes I just need to acknowledge that it's hard, that it's unpleasant, that it hurts. And acknowledging that doesn't mean that I don't have faith. It doesn't mean that I'm going to let pain dictate the kind of person that I am. But it's just there, and sometimes just acknowledging that it's difficult, and that just takes a little bit of a weight off. Like, I don't have to pretend like it's good all the time. I try to be real honest. People ask me how I'm doing, because how I'm doing encompasses a lot more than how I feel. So I'm like, at the moment, I'm a little medicated, and I feel all right. That would explain some things. You just erase that part. If you're having a hard time, and really, that could be every one of us. It's okay to acknowledge that it's hard. God isn't intimidated by us saying, God, this is hard. I don't like it. I want this to be over. That is okay. And this, again, not that other churches don't have this as a value, but that's something that we are deeply committed to in the leadership of this church. And we can just be honest about stuff like that, and that it really is okay. We're going to go back to Psalm 35, verses 22. Start at 22. You have seen, O Lord, do not be silent. O Lord, do not be far from me. Wake up. Bestir yourself for my defense, for my cause, my God and my Lord. Vindicate me, O Lord, my God, according to your righteousness. Do not let them rejoice over me. Do not let them say to themselves, aha, we have our heart's desire. Do not let them say, we have swallowed you up. Let all those who rejoice at my calamity be put to shame and confusion. Let those who exalt themselves against me be clothed with shame and dishonor. David's response to his turmoil is to turn to God. He knows that God has delivered him from the time he was a shepherd and bears were attacking the sheep, he knows that God has been there for him. And here he is in the middle of years of being chased with the goal of killing him. He implores God to act quickly, but I don't think I'm reading into it, that there's a tone in what he writes that he indicates that he knows that this isn't going to be the time that God lets him down. He knows that that day is not coming. His experience is miserable and long. And his response is to acknowledge, God, this is terrible. But I need you to do something. This should be our response. We entreat upon God the urgency of our situation, but then we trust that his solution is going to come. Last couple verses. Let those who desire my vindication shout for joy and be glad, and say evermore, great is the Lord who delights in the welfare of his servant. David's not alone in this experience. He has people with him. And when the deliverance comes, they are going to rejoice with him. I love it. You're going through something unpleasant, and you are not alone. This is why we have church. This is why we have a family like this. And it would be awesome if the family will continue to grow. Man, we're a family, and you are not alone in the thing that you're dealing with. Verse 28. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all day long. David acknowledges his faith in God and promises that when God's solution comes, he's going to give God the credit for it. I know I've done this. Prayed and prayed. And God has brought a solution. And then I talked about how awesome I am. Look at my creative way that I solved this problem. David ends up in exactly the place that we need to be. God has earned David's trust, and he has likely earned yours. I know that he has earned mine. And if not, if you don't feel like God has earned your trust, that's where the faith comes. You take that step and then let him earn it. I 100% believe that God does miraculous, supernatural things. I believe there are people who are healed from things a lot worse than moderate spinal cord damage. I believe that, I trust that, I pray about that, and I have people that I don't even know praying about that for me. And a lot of them are grandmas, and that is counts as 10 prayers, at least. I would love it to get up and walk and run and tackle you or something. I don't know what I would do. I would still catch you, but But until that day, God has earned my trust. I haven't been through what you've been through. Sometimes when people talk to me about what they're dealing with, especially when they're dealing with a physical thing, sometimes they'll kind of couch it with, now, of course, that's nothing like what you go through. And I understand that. That's a kind thought, but it's really unnecessary, and I'm not even sure that it's accurate. What you go through is a big deal. That's your thing. It doesn't compare directly to my thing. My thing doesn't compare directly to yours. You know? Sometimes I get that little bit of attitude. I was in the hospital, like as I was leaving the hospital after the first time, after surgery last year. You know, they ask you, the pain scale, the 1 to 10, where are you at? I just figure 10 is crucifixion. You know, okay, so am I halfway to crucifixion? No. So I'm at a 3. Angie always gets mad. His 3 is like a 7. No, 7 is like eaten alive by fire ants. That's not, not actively being mauled by a bear. It's not. So I'm telling the nurse, like, 3, 4. And the guy comes in next to me and like, roommate, like as I was leaving, he's like, oh, 8. And they're like, really? Because 8's like, oh yeah. He just needed he was looking for medication. Dude, no one in this building has ever had an 8. You know what? I'll give you that one. I'll give you that one. Because I will not ever know. I'll give you having a baby. There's no. That's fair. That's why I never say to Angie things like, "You don't know what this feels like." I bet she does. A little different, not exactly the same pain, but I was in the room and that did not look pleasant. Seriously, you were giant. You were already like 3'6", like 70 pounds, I think. I know. You were born at 7. I haven't been through what you've been through, but I know that it weighs on you, and that you would love for God to bring a timely rescue. And it's hard, and sometimes it sucks, and it's okay to acknowledge that. Let's remember to turn to God and seek His solution, and then let's have the faith to trust Him that His solution is going to be what we need, and then give Him the glory when He does it. God, I know that there are people in this room going through nightmares. Take different shapes and they affect us in different ways, and some of them are very public and some of them are very private. God, they're hard and we don't like them. And we desperately need you. We need you. We trust you, God, to bring a solution, to bring resolution, to bring peace, to heal, to help people get their head on straight. God, our hearts are broken by some poor choices around us, things that we have no control over. We need you. I ask, God, that in each one of those situations that is in every person's mind in this room, God, that you would come quickly. God, it is our desire to walk in that faith until that resolution comes, and to give you all of the glory and honor when you do what you do. thanks for this really great opportunity in your word to see how even David struggled and how he dealt with just enormous problems. Actual life and death. Thank you so much for your love and for the intimate way that you know us. Just humbled that you care. I'm humbled that you're even aware of what's going on in my life. Who am I that you should even notice me? But you do, and I am so grateful. I ask you just to do miracle after miracle in the lives of these people this morning. All of us, God, we need you. Thank you so much for that. And I look forward to hearing story after story of the great things that you have done. Thank you so much for being with us today. In Jesus' name. Oh, all right. Thank you very much for being here. As far as I know, Adam will be back next week. And